Welcome to my rye patch. I'm Diego, D-I-E-G-O, and today we're turning all of this rye into soil as fast and easy as possible. Let me just come up here and show you how to do that. If you're a home gardener, you may want to grow cover crops, but you may struggle at that question of, what do I do with the cover crop when it comes time to terminate that crop? How do I stop the cover crop from growing so I can get soil that I can use for things I want to eat? How do I stop the cover crop from growing so the cover crop doesn't grow back and turn into a weed? Well, there's a few strategies you could use from that. You could till it in if you wanted. You could chop and drop it, just cut it down or mow it down in place and let it decompose. You could harvest it in situ and then take all the stuff that you harvest and compost that separately. Or you could pull a tarp over it and just let it go. Let's look at each of those options and discuss kind of the pros and cons real quick. Number one, tillage. Well, one, you have to have a tiller. I don't actually have a tiller, and I'm choosing to go a no-till approach. It's not because I believe that's some sort of miracle cure. I just think no-till does lead to better soil texture over time. I don't think I need to have a tiller on my scale, so I don't have one. But if you did have a tiller, till it in and just let the soil digest it. The benefits of tillage when working with a cover crop is you can make a cover crop go away like that. Pretty quick, it's just gone. You till it in and you're left with soil, let the soil digest the cover crop for a few weeks, and you're good to go. The second way that you could do this is a chop and drop. You could use a scythe, you could use a flail mower, you could use a mower, and just mow all the cover crop down in place and walk away. Just let it sit there and let it do whatever it does. And I'm still not exactly sure what it does. I think a lot of it just up into the sky and not a lot of it down into the soil. So I'm not a big fan of the chop and drop scenario. I don't think it works that well. Now, another thing we could do is harvest the tops, compost those separately, leaving the roots in place. The roots build soil here, the tops in the form of compost build soil elsewhere, and then we can reintroduce that compost to the row here. That's maybe what I'm going to do today. We'll see ahead. A little spoiler alert there. The fourth option is getting a big, huge tarp and just pull it right over the beds and just leave it. We're done. Walk away. And then see what it does. Now, I do question what happens to the soil when you tarp a bed. It's not getting worse. I just question if it actually gets better. These beds right here used to have mustard in them. And if you go back a few videos, you'll see how I drag a sled over this to try and knock these stalks down. It didn't really work. And then I tarped these beds trying to digest the stalks, which you can obviously see just aren't digested at all. And I was trying to build soil, and looking at the soil now, is it better? It's hard to say. So I'm not going to say that that actually worked. Let's actually take a closer look at this just to dissect that experiment that we did. So all throughout this bed, there are stalks of mustard left. They were just too fibrous, too full of carbon to want to break down under the tarp in the few weeks I left them tarp. It just didn't help break them down. If I look at the soil, it doesn't look bad, but honestly, when I pulled the tarp off, I just don't know that it looked any better. If I would have showed you this soil pre-tarp and then we compared it post-tarp, is it any better? I don't think it is. One thing the tarp did do was take away all the little weeds that were scattered around in here, leaving the bigger stalks, so we did solve that problem. Now, let's go back up top so I can talk about the rye again. Today, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be using this knife right here to cut the tops off all the rye, leaving the bottoms in place, and then I'll move the tops somewhere where I can compost them. Now, just kind of looking at this bed, there's a lot of material here, and this is going to take some time, so I guess I better get after it. You know, on second thought, I have a different plan. It's time for an experiment. So we're not actually going to cut the tops off all these rye plants today. But let me let you in on a little secret here. So it was never actually the plan to cut the tops off the rye. I just had to act like that for the video to kind of set the plot. So let's get back to it, but it wasn't the plan to cut the tops off. Yesterday I spent about 2 hours harvesting 3 beds of vetch. Vetch that was long, it was stringy, it was overlapping, it was nappy. It took a long time. Going plant by plant through 3 beds took forever. It was really hard work. And honestly, I'm all about hard work, but I don't want to do it again today. I'm just not into it. So I started to think, what's the easiest way we can get rid of all this biomass and turn it into soil with the least amount of work possible, so you can use the strategy at your home. Now this is going to be an experiment. I've never done this, so I'm not going to guarantee any results, but you're going to come along with me on this experiment throughout this video, throughout time, and we'll see how the experiment actually plays out by the end of this video. What we're going to be doing is we are going to tarp these beds as is. I'm not going to do anything. There's no rolling, there's no cutting, there's no dragging a sled over it. We're just going to throw a tarp on top of here. It's going to cover all 4 of these beds, one large continuous tarp. I'm going to weight it down on these beds. I'm going to put some old decking on top of these beds to make sure that there's a good soil to plant to tarp contact to smush this stuff down. I'll probably even walk on it because there's nothing really sharp here that's going to punch through the tarp. All this flowery radish that's left here, it's fine. It's 3 feet tall. It's going to get knocked down as well by the tarp. And then I'm going to come back every week and we're going to take a look at what does it look like underneath. Can we successfully just digest all of this biomass into the soil 100% passively using a tarp? I mean, if we could do that, wouldn't that be great? It's super easy to pull out a tarp and it's kind of hard to do everything else. So let's get out a tarp, see what happens, and we'll go from there. All right, here's the tarp. It's a big boy. It is a Billboard tarp. I love Billboard tarps. You can find them by just searching Billboard tarps online here. The reason I love Billboard tarps is they're UV treated, they're thick. If you cut them, the edges don't fray. They tend to be pretty pliable in cold weather and warm weather. And they're just cheap compared to like silage tarp. So I love using Billboard tarps. Things I've learned about buying tarps: number 1, buy them bigger than you need. You want to overlap the bed by, I'd say, several feet on the ends and the sides. So if you have a bed unit that is 30 feet wide, 50 feet long, try and find something like 55 by 35 feet. So you have some good overlap there in case wind comes along and things just don't fit right or they're not sized right. This is a brand new used one, so let's just cut it open and get started. Now, they are very heavy. This roll itself is probably almost 60 pounds, so you may need some help maneuvering this. One thing that's actually really cool about these Billboard tarps is they were actually billboards at one period in time, so it's kind of like an Easter egg. When you open them up, you don't really know what's inside, so I'm kind of curious to see what was advertised on this tarp before it got to me. Now, if you're worried about the advertising and what material might be on there, you know, maybe it's a porn store, don't worry, the other side is black. So you can just flip it over and have the dirty side down by the soil and the clean side up facing heaven. All right, we hit Billboard gold on this one, or should I say platinum? Because you know what's on the other side of this black tarp? I have my very own Gucci Mane billboard. That is right, platinum selling rap artist Gucci Mane is back on Spotify is what is on the other side of this tarp. We see some heavy chains adorning his neck and a lot of back tattoo, but Gucci Mane is back on Spotify. That's now in my garden. So the experiment now is, how quick can we turn everything under these two beds into soil, bare soil, as fast as possible, as easy as possible. I'll check back on a weekly basis, giving you updates. What's your guess? How long is this going to take? I'm thinking it's going to take 4 weeks. Now, one thing I am going to do is I'm going to irrigate under here. I'm going to run the drip every other day or so to keep it moist. Moisture will accelerate the process, the rot of it, if you will. I've noticed in the past, if it's too dry, even though we've gotten a lot of rain lately, like stuff just doesn't want to break down. I really want to speed that up, so I will water down here. Another thing I could do, I'm not going to do it this time, but I might do it later if this is a problem. Somebody suggested using a lawn roller to mow this stuff down, and I like that idea. I could just go over the tarp with a lawn roller. Like, forget trying to do the lawn roller without the tarp. Put the tarp down and then roll the bed with the tarp on. That way you get a nice even smush, and I think that'll be actually really nice. It could work. Phone is going off. Amateurs. Forgot to turn it off. I'm gonna weight this down using old deck boards. I don't want Gucci Man to become a sail if some wind comes along and end up in the neighbor's yard. So I'll apply some weight on here, putting extra weight on these rows just to try and, again, mash that stuff down. So that's it for this week. If you've made it this far, just hang in till the end. Next week will actually be a few seconds from now. In fact, next week will be right now. 1 week later, let's pull up the tarp and see what this looks like. So what do we have here? We have a lot of yellowing, a lot of greening, definitely wilting. It's starting to break down here in place after 1 week. I have been running the drip here every day for, I think it's about 30 minutes to rehydrate the soil and just to keep this environment really moist to help speed up the breakdown. But it looks like the tarp so far is taking hold. Nothing standing as tall as it was. The tarp has kind of collapsed a little bit under its own weight. We're supposed to get a bunch of rain this week, so I'm going to turn the drippers off and we'll see what this looks like next Sunday. Seven weeks later, what do we have under here? We have something that I would say is still identifiable as rye. There's the leaves and the stalks. The stalks I would expect. It's more mature carbon. It's going to take longer to break down. That should be here. I'm a little surprised to see the leaves that come off the stalks still here. If I look down the row, I can still see bumps and ridges. I can clearly see that this bed had 3 rows of rye planted in it. So after 7 weeks, this actually didn't break down as much as I thought. I thought I was going to pull this back and just see, bare soil here, and I really didn't see that at all, or I'm not seeing that at all. I'm seeing dead rye. One of the big questions here is, what did this accomplish? Did it do anything? Well, it kind of killed the cover crop. I mean, when I pull this tarp off, and I'm going to pull it off today because it's time to plant tomatoes in these beds, this is just going to turn into straw, and that's fine. But looking at the soil itself, does the soil itself look any better because this cover crop was terminated under this plastic versus the bed, right there next to it that didn't have the cover crop on it yet has been under the plastic? Honestly, I'm not so sure that it looks that much better. The question I have is, where does all the organic matter go? So the above ground portion of organic matter, the leaves and the stalk, they're still here. They're not being digested. Worms aren't coming up and pulling this under the ground, at least on this 7-week time scale. Yes, the roots are staying in the ground, but that would be the same whether we mowed this down, cropped it off, had chickens come through here and eat it, the roots would still be in the ground. So when you tarp, what is actually happening? Are you creating a good environment, a bad environment? Worms and biological activity like moisture. They like the warmth under tarps. A lot of times you just pull up plastic with nothing underneath it, you'll see a lot of activity. So the plastic itself provides some benefit. I'm not going to deny that. I think plastic is a great tool to use in the garden on stale beds, but covering cover crops in plastic to terminate them, I'm not so sure it works, and let me give you some summary thoughts on this whole process. After 7 weeks, I've thought a lot about this, and I'm not sure that tarping cover crops to kill them is worth it. I'm not sure it works on the gardening scale. If you think about it, 7 weeks is 2 months. That's great if those 2 months are over the winter. If they're over the summer, if you have to take a bed out of production for 2 months and you don't have a lot of beds to begin with, that's a long time to tie up a bed, terminating a cover crop and maybe getting additional benefit out of it versus, say, mechanically harvesting the cover crop and then just planting right back into it. So I'm not so sure that the time trade-off in terms of what you're getting versus the time in makes sense using tarps to kill cover crops. I would have thought after 7 weeks that I would have pulled this up and I would have saw nice rich soil with literally no biomass left. I mean, we've had really wet weather, so the soil has been moist. We've had really warm weather, so temperature hasn't been an issue. Everything should be humming. Biological activity should be happening, and it definitely is. Stuff's breaking down. It's just not breaking down on that gardening scale that I'd like to see it. So I can say that it works, it's just not working on the gardener's time frame. I don't know what benefit I'm not sure what the soil benefit is to covering up a cover crop with plastic. Where is that cover crop that's above ground between the soil and the plastic going? What's happening? Is that actually benefiting the soil? Visually, I can't tell a difference between a bare bed and the cover crop's bed in terms of how the soil broke down. Now, obviously, I don't have x-ray or microscopic eyes. I can't see everything. So there's probably stuff happening that is of benefit, but I question how much benefit there is. Number 3, I think if you're growing cover crops in a garden scale, you're gonna have to be thinking about mechanical harvesting at the end of the day. Maybe that mechanical harvesting is with chickens or sheep or cows. Maybe that mechanical harvesting is with a lawnmower, a string trimmer, or a scythe. I think the best way to handle cover crops in the garden is cut them off at surface and then either leave that biomass on ground or do what I do, take it away and compost it or feed it to your animals, and then, you know, kill off any remainder with plastic or cover that bed up with plastic if you're not going to use it. But I think simply just pulling plastic tarps over cover crops, hoping to terminate them quickly to turn the bed, it's not really going to happen. It's not going to be a reality. So I think mechanical cultivation is going to be a necessity anytime I'm growing cover crops now, because this just didn't work on the scale that I needed to work at. Overall, I think plastic is a very beneficial tool to use in the beds. I think it can really help soil if you're not using those beds, if they're sitting stale or if they're laying fallow. I think covering them in plastic is great. It protects them from the sun. It keeps moisture from evaporating from the soil quickly. It keeps biological activity happening at surface. So plastic itself, I think, is a useful tool. I'm just not sure it's as useful of a tool as you would need in this context. Now, one place where I could see plastic being used if you need to kill off a bunch of cover crops is if you had bed blocks, meaning like here's garden 1, here's garden 2, here's garden 3. I planted cover crops in garden number 3. I'm not going to need it for 9 months or another year, and I want to terminate those cover crops. Okay, tarp the whole dang thing and let it sit for a year. By then, you're probably going to have really nice soil, but 7 weeks, again, it's just not going to work for a gardener. So after editing this video, going back and looking at the footage and then taking some time to think about things, I want to kind of amend my conclusions a little bit here. If you look at what's happening here, this is at 4 weeks and at 5 weeks. It's very different than what that crop looked like at day 1. When we started the experiment. So looking at what we have here, could I classify this as successfully terminated? I actually think I could. I think initially I was disappointed. I pulled up the tarp and I wanted to see just bare soil with no biomass remaining. Probably a little too harsh, a little unfair. So I think at that 4-week mark that we see here, we could actually consider that done. Because I have a feeling you could walk along with a garden rake, like a stiff-toothed garden rake, and rake a lot of that biomass right up and pull it off the surface, and then you could use that to mulch the surface or put it in your chicken coop or compost it or do something else with it. Now that's a little bit of work, but it's minimal work. It could be done in 1 minute on a 50-foot bed. It's not going to take much time. And if you look at the initial conditions right here, you definitely couldn't run a rake across that without the rake snagging. You'd pull up the roots, you'd do all sorts of crazy things. It would be a real chore. So if I compare cleanup of a bed from day 0 or day 1 to week 4, I think at week 4 we could say the tarp terminated enough to, at least with a little bit of post assistance, get a clean seating surface. So 4 weeks with a little modification, we could consider that done and probably pretty good. A couple other things that have came up from talking to people as well, it could be time of year. I did have warmer day temperatures where some of our temperatures got actually up to 90 degrees when the tarp was on, but was the soil temperature warm enough? Because some of our nights would dip down into the 40s. So your soil temperature might only be around 50 degrees versus in the summer, maybe that soil temperature is, 60 degrees. Is there enough of a bump in soil temperature to turn up the biodiversity in the soil, to get that biodiversity engine of the soil going, that it would make a big difference? Possibly. So I'll concede that maybe doing this in the middle of summer would make a difference, because soil temperatures, nighttime temperatures, air temperature would all be warmer, which might lead to more bioactivity. Another thing that came up was, well, are those soils that biologically active to begin with? That's a good point. Maybe these soils weren't biologically active enough to make a big difference. So on highly biologically active soils, maybe this would have decomposed faster. Another solution to solving this problem that I did mention in the video would be do some of the mechanical breakdown in advance. Chop up that biomass before tarping it, reduce particle size, especially on that mature carbon, to get it smaller, to increase the surface area, so what biology is there can break down what remains faster. Another way tarping might work is if you grow a shorter term crop. So say you plant a cover crop and you terminate it at 1 month instead of, I think this was in about 3 months. If I could terminate it sooner, that means the plants aren't necessarily just smaller, they're less mature, they're less woody. The stalks aren't as beefy, as thick, as fibrous. If you're terminating a younger cover crop, you'd still get all the benefits of the roots going into the soil, meaning physically putting roots into the soil, biomass going into the soil. You'd get all the benefit of all that root exudate in the soil during that 1 month. But then you'd also get the potential above ground benefit of the biomass above surface. And then you could terminate that less mature above ground biomass probably easier than more mature stalks like I had here, and that might eliminate the raking. So that itself could be a solution. So all in, those are my thoughts. Again, is it beneficial? I'm not totally sure. I'm more evolving and leaning towards the idea of having perpetual ground cover, something always growing, a cover crop that never gets terminated, so you'd never need a tarp to begin with. But obviously in certain situations, for certain people, if you're a farm, you need clean beds from time to time to do what you're trying to do. You gotta find a way to get those clean beds. Tarping may or may not be a solution to do that. It's really going to depend on how you manage the crop while it's growing, when you decide to terminate, and how you actually terminate that crop in conjunction with the tarp. But just pulling the tarp over, I'm not sold that that's going to actually work. So now the experiment's over. I'll probably never try this experiment again because I've seen the results. I get what's going to happen. It's not going to work on the time scale that I need it to. Next step is we're just going to pull this tarp off and plant tomatoes into it. Future video for a future time. But for this time, that's all. Thanks for watching. Until next time, be nice, be thankful, and do the work.